The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the quiet suburban neighborhood. Rows of neatly manicured lawns stretched along the winding streets, each house looking nearly identical, pristine, controlled, and eerily perfect. It was the kind of place that prided itself on order, where any deviation from the norm was met with suspicion. As James pulled his SUV into the driveway of his newly purchased home, he exhaled, taking in the moment. Months of paperwork, negotiations, and inspections had led to this. The first time he could finally step foot into his own place. He wasn't moving in just yet, only stopping by to check on a few things before the movers arrived the next day. He climbed out of the car, dressed casually in jeans and a black t-shirt, a clipboard in one hand and a small toolbox in the other. Just as he was about to unlock the front door, he felt it. That unmistakable sensation of being watched. A glance to his left confirmed it. Across the street, a woman stood on her porch, arms crossed, eyes locked onto him with thinly veiled suspicion. She was in her late 50s, with perfectly curled blonde hair and an expression that screamed authority. James had encountered her type. Before? She didn't wait long before making her move. "Excuse me." Her voice sliced through the quiet afternoon like a blade. "Can I help you with something?" James turned, offering a polite smile. "No, thanks. I'm just checking on my place." Her eyes narrowed. "Your place?" "Yeah," he said, turning the key in the lock. "I just closed on it last week." A pause. She scanned him from head to toe, skepticism dripping from her gaze. "I don't recall seeing a notice about any new homeowners." James raised an eyebrow, resisting the urge to roll his eyes. "Well, I don't think the HOA sends out announcements for that." The woman's lips pursed into a thin line. Without another word, she reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and started dialing. James sighed. He already knew what was happening. Within minutes, a white security SUV rolled up to the curb, lights flashing. Two uniformed guards stepped out, hands resting on their belts. "Sir, we received a report about a suspicious individual on the property," one of them said, his tone firm but neutral. James let out a slow breath, his grip tightening around the clipboard. This was about to get interesting. "Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from." All right, let's keep going. Karen Whitmore had lived in the neighborhood for over 15 years, and in that time, she had crafted an unshakable reputation. Not as a friendly neighbor or a welcoming presence, but as the self-appointed gatekeeper of the community. She held no official title beyond her position on the HOA board, yet she carried herself like a sheriff patrolling her jurisdiction. Rules were her weapon, and enforcement was her duty. From her porch, she surveyed the street as if it were her kingdom. She knew every resident by name, their routines, their guests, and even the color of their trash bins. Any deviation from the established order, no matter how minor, was met with swift disapproval. A flower bed planted an inch too close to the sidewalk? Expect a violation notice? A car parked facing the wrong direction? Prepare for a call to security. Karen thrived on control, and most people knew better than to cross her. James was simply the latest in a long list of unfortunate souls who had fallen under her scrutiny. To her, he wasn't a new neighbor. He was an unknown variable, and unknowns were dangerous. She had taken down others before. There was the young couple who dared to paint their door a shade of blue that wasn't on the approved color list. Karen had led the charge to find them until they repainted it. Then there was Mr. Henderson, an elderly man who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. He had planted a small vegetable garden in his backyard. Harmless, peaceful, but it didn't align with HOA guidelines. Karen made sure he received multiple violation notices until he eventually gave up and tore it down. And who could forget the incident with the teenage boy riding his skateboard in the cul-de-sac? Karen had called security, claiming reckless. behavior, and a safety hazard. The boy's parents had tried to fight back, but Karen had the HOA rulebook memorized like scripture. The skateboard was banned, and that was that. To Karen, she wasn't being difficult. She was protecting the integrity of the neighborhood. As she watched James interact with security from across the street, her expression remained unreadable, but internally, she was pleased. She had acted quickly, preventing what she saw as an inevitable disruption. Newcomers needed to be put in their place early to understand that this wasn't just any neighborhood. It was her neighborhood. What Karen didn't realize, however, was that this time she had picked the wrong person to challenge. James stood firm as the two security officers approached, their expressions unreadable but their posture unmistakably authoritative. The situation was playing out exactly as he had predicted the moment he saw Karen reach for her phone. This wasn't about safety. This was about control. One of the guards, a broad-shouldered man with a badge clipped to his chest, stopped a few feet from James and spoke in a flat, practiced tone. "Sir, we received a report of a suspicious individual on the property. Can you state your reason for being here?" James exhaled slowly, keeping his composure. "This is my house," he said, nodding toward the front door. "I closed on it last week. Just came by to check on a few things before moving in." Karen, who had made her way across the street, scoffed loudly. "That's not possible," she interjected, folding her arms. "I'm on the HOA board. We would have been informed if someone new was moving in. This house hasn't been sold." James turned to her, jaw tightening. "I don't think the HOA has to approve real estate transactions," he said evenly. The second security guard, a younger man who looked a little less sure of himself, shifted on his feet. "Do you have any proof that this is your property?" James clenched his teeth. Proof? He had keys, a purchase agreement in his car, and legal ownership of the home. But the fact that he was being asked to prove himself in his own driveway was infuriating. Karen took a step forward, her voice laced with manufactured concern. "Look, I don't know who you are, but we have had issues with break-ins in the past," she said. "It's only natural to be cautious. And honestly, I saw you snooping around the house. You had a clipboard, like you were inspecting something. Maybe casing the place?" James let out a sharp laugh of disbelief. "You mean the clipboard I'm using to check repairs before I move in?" Karen ignored him and turned back to the officers. "I think he might be a squatter," she declared. "Or maybe trying to scam his way into the house. People do that, you know." The younger guard hesitated, looking between Karen and James, while the older one remained rigid. James could see it in their eyes. The seed of doubt had been planted. Karen had done this before, manipulated situations to make herself look like the hero. James took a measured breath. He knew escalating the situation would only make things worse, so he reached for the keys in his pocket. "You want proof? Here." He held them up, letting the metal glint under the afternoon sun. "These are my house keys. Would a squatter have these?" Karen narrowed her eyes, unimpressed. "Keys can be copied," she muttered. James clenched, his jaw. "You've got to be kidding me." The older officer sighed. "Sir, we're just doing our job. If you could provide some official documentation, we can clear this up." James ground his teeth, suppressing his frustration. He knew his car registration and purchase agreement were sitting in his glove compartment, but the principle of the situation gnawed at him. He shouldn't have to prove anything. Karen, sensing the moment tipping in her favor, smirked. "See, if he really lived here, he wouldn't be making such a fuss about showing proof." James inhaled deeply, forcing himself to remain calm. "Fine," he said, stepping toward his car. "I'll get the papers." But before he could take another step, the older officer raised a hand. "Not so fast. Let's keep things simple. We'll need to verify your identity first." James froze. This was beyond ridiculous. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't a trespasser. And yet, here he was, being treated like one. Karen crossed her arms, her smirk deepening. She had won, at least that's what she thought. What she didn't know was that James had one final card to play. A thick, uneasy silence settled over the driveway. James could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the heat of the afternoon sun, mixing with the simmering frustration in his chest. He had done nothing wrong. Nothing but exist in a space that Karen had decided he didn't belong in. But Karen wasn't done. She let out a dramatic sigh, loud enough for the security officers and the few neighbors now peeking from their porches to hear. "You know, this is exactly why we need stricter rules around here," she announced, shaking her head. "People think they can just come and go as they please, no regard for the community." James turned his head slightly, noticing movement from the corner of his eye. A man in his 60s, dressed in golf attire, had stepped onto his lawn, watching the situation unfold with interest. A woman in yoga pants and a visor stood a few houses down, phone in hand, whispering to someone beside her. They weren't intervening, but they weren't looking away either. The show had begun, and James was the main event. The younger security officer shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, let's not make assumptions." Karen cut him off. "Assumptions? Look at him. He has no proof of ownership. He refuses to leave. And he's being difficult on purpose." She gestured to the house. "I mean, be realistic. Does this look like his kind of place?" James's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what she was implying. And from the way some of the neighbors glanced at each other, they did too. The older security officer exhaled, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Sir, if you can't provide immediate proof of ownership, we're going to have to ask you to vacate the premises until this matter is sorted out." James let out a slow breath. "This is my property," he said again, his voice lower, controlled. "I don't need to vacate my own home." Karen scoffed. "Oh, so now it's your home? Because a minute ago, you didn't have any proof. Sounds suspicious to me." She turned to the growing audience. "Honestly, I'm just looking out for the neighborhood. We can't let just anyone claim a house as their own." A murmur rippled through the small crowd. Some nodded in agreement, while others remained uncertain, their gazes flickering between Karen and James. The ones who had lived here long enough knew that Karen thrived on drama, but few had ever directly challenged her. James could see the doubt in their faces. Some wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, but Karen had done what she always did. Planted suspicion like a seed and let it take root. The younger security officer, clearly uneasy, glanced at his partner. "Maybe we should call this in. Check with the HOA or property records before making him leave." Karen gasped as if personally insulted. "Check what? You think he's telling the truth? Next thing you know, he'll be claiming your house too." James had had enough. He turned, taking slow steps toward Karen, closing the distance between them just enough to make sure she heard him clearly. His voice was steady, but the edge was unmistakable. "You don't know a damn thing about me," he said. "And you sure as hell don't have the right to decide who does and doesn't belong here." Karen took a step back, her eyes widening for a fraction of a second before she caught herself. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not so directly. James took a deep breath, then turned to the officers. "I'm done playing games. If you want proof, I'll give you proof." With that, he reached into his back pocket. The officers stiffened, their hands instinctively moving toward their belts, but James didn't hesitate. He pulled out his wallet, flipped it open, and held it up for them to see. A golden badge gleamed under the sunlight. The crowd fell silent. Karen's smirk vanished. James locked eyes with the older security officer. "I work for the state, and I know my rights." Karen took a step back, her face paling as she realized her mistake. She had picked the wrong person to mess with. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The golden badge in James's hand caught the sunlight, its polished surface reflecting a bright, undeniable truth. The once murmuring crowd went silent. Even the security officers, who had been pressing him just moments ago, stood rigid, eyes locked onto the emblem in his palm. Karen's face drained of color. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. James didn't lower his hand just yet. He let them all take in what they were looking at. Finally, he spoke. His voice was calm, but his words carried weight. "I'm a state investigator. Fraud, real estate scams, HOA misconduct, you name it. I've dealt with it." His gaze flickered to Karen, who took an instinctive step back. "And you just made a big mistake." The older security officer cleared his throat, shifting awkwardly. "Wait, you're with the state?" His posture changed immediately, straightening as if standing in front of a superior. "Sir, I didn't know." James finally lowered his wallet, sliding it back into his pocket. "You didn't ask," he replied. His patience was wearing thin, but he wasn't about to lash out. He wanted this moment to sink in. Karen, however, wasn't done yet. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, her face twisting into a scowl. "Oh, please," she scoffed, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her confidence. "Anyone can get one of those badges online. That doesn't prove anything." James let out a short, humorless laugh. "You're right. Some people do buy fake badges," he admitted. "But mine comes with something else." He reached into his back pocket again, this time pulling out a slim, official-looking ID card. He held it up for them all to see. "A state-issued ID, direct from the Attorney General's office." Karen's bravado faltered. The younger security officer stepped forward, peering at the card. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. That's real," he muttered under his breath. The shift in energy was instant. The small group of onlookers, who had moments ago been eager spectators, now exchanged nervous glances. Some subtly backed away, suddenly unsure of where they stood. Karen's fingers twitched at her sides. This is ridiculous," she stammered. "If you're really with the state, why are you even here? What, you think you're some kind of undercover agent?" Her attempt at sarcasm fell flat. James turned fully to face her, his gaze level. "I bought this house," he said simply, "because I wanted a quiet place to live." He let the words hang in the air for a second before adding, "But now, I think I just found a whole new case to investigate." Karen's eyes widened. "Well, what?" James tilted his head slightly. "See, when I moved in, I wasn't planning on looking into anything. I was off the clock. But now I'm wondering, how many complaints have been filed against this HOA? How many violations have been issued unfairly? How many residents have been targeted just because someone didn't like the way they looked or where they came from?" Karen paled further. You can't just—" James raised a brow. "Actually, I can." He turned to the security officers. "I assume you gentlemen are done questioning me?" The older officer nodded stiffly. "Yes, sir." Karen opened her mouth again, but one of the neighbors, an older man in a polo shirt, finally stepped forward. "You know, Karen," he said, rubbing his chin, "this isn't the first time you've accused someone of something they didn't do." A woman standing nearby nodded. "Yeah, remember when you called security on the Harris kids just because they were playing in their own driveway?" A murmur of agreement spread through the crowd. The tide was shifting. Karen's confidence crumbled right before their eyes. I was just trying to protect the neighborhood," she mumbled. "I didn't mean—" James cut her off. "You did mean to," he said, his voice firm. "Because that's what you always do, isn't it? You think the rules don't apply? To you. You think you get to decide who belongs and who doesn't." He took a step closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "But that ends today." Karen swallowed hard. James let the moment settle before turning back to his house. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to actually enjoy the home I legally own." He took a step toward his door. The crowd watched him go, the realization dawning on them that, for the first time, Karen had been put in her place. The younger security officer cleared his throat. Sorry for the trouble, sir," he mumbled. James didn't stop walking. "You will be," he muttered under his breath. Karen stood frozen, her reign of unchecked authority slipping through her fingers, and for the first time in a long time, she had no idea what to do next. Karen stood frozen, her mouth slightly open as if she wanted to argue, but no words came out. The weight of the situation had finally caught up with her. The smug authority she had wielded so effortlessly minutes ago had evaporated, replaced by something she was entirely unfamiliar with. Fear. James didn't press her immediately. He let the silence stretch, let the realization settle into her bones. The crowd of neighbors remained still, their previous curiosity now shifting into something more like scrutiny. A few had their arms crossed, watching Karen with expressions that weren't as friendly as before. The older security officer was the first to break the tension. He cleared his throat awkwardly. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said, shifting uncomfortably. His earlier sternness had vanished. Now, he looked like a man who realized he had just backed the wrong side. James finally turned to him. His face was calm, controlled, but there was no mistaking the edge in his voice. "A misunderstanding?" He let out a small, humorless chuckle. "I told you multiple times that this was my house. I explained myself, but instead of listening, you assumed I was in the wrong. You let her decide that I didn't belong." The officer's gaze dropped slightly. Well, we have to take reports seriously," he said, though his words lacked conviction. James nodded. "I understand that. What I don't understand is why her word was enough to make you ignore mine." Karen flinched, as if she had been physically struck. The younger officer, clearly more rattled, jumped in. "Sir, I'm really sorry," he stammered. "I should have asked for your ID before making assumptions." He shot a quick glare at Karen. This just got out of hand." Karen's head snapped toward him. "Out of hand," she repeated, her voice rising slightly. "You saw how he acted. He was being evasive." James turned to her now, finally giving her his full attention. His expression remained unreadable. "I was moving in," he said plainly. "That's all." He took a slow step toward her. "You didn't see a trespasser, Karen. You saw someone you didn't recognize. Someone you didn't want here." Karen shook her head rapidly. No, that's not it at all. I was just—" James cut her off, his voice quieter now but sharper. "I've dealt with people like you before. You don't see yourself as the bad guy, do you? You think you're just looking out for the neighborhood. But somehow, the only people you ever look out for are the ones who look like you." Karen paled. The crowd murmured again, and James could tell that, this time, they weren't just whispering about him. They were whispering about her. One of the neighbors, an older woman in a floral blouse, finally spoke up. "You know, this isn't the first time," she said slowly. Her gaze lingered on Karen, and for the first time there was no politeness in it. Another man nodded. "Yeah, remember when the Rodriguez family had that moving truck out front? Karen made a fuss about that too. And the Jeffersons," someone else added. "She called the HOA on them for unauthorized construction when they were just repainting their mailbox." Karen's eyes darted from face to face. That's different. Those were actual concerns," she insisted, but her voice was losing strength. James let out a slow breath. "No, Karen, this was a power trip," he said simply. "And now? It's over." She looked at him sharply. You think you can just waltz in here and turn everyone against me?" James didn't blink. "Karen, you did that all by yourself." The weight of his words crushed whatever fight she had left. Her shoulders slumped slightly, her once dominant posture deflating. The older security officer exhaled. "Sir, we'll be filing a report about this incident," he said, throwing a glance at Karen. "And We'll be speaking with the HOA, bored about repeated false complaints. Karen's head whipped toward him. You can't be serious, but the younger officer nodded. We are. He turned back to James. Again, sir, I truly apologize. If there's anything we can do, James held up a hand. Just do your job better next time, he said. Then, after a pause, and maybe, start by questioning the people who really need to be questioned. The officers nodded stiffly, before turning away. The small crowd began to disperse, but not before throwing one last look at Karen. Some shook their heads, others just walked away. But not a single person came to her defense. She was alone. James didn't gloat. He didn't need to. Instead, he turned toward his house and walked up the steps. He could feel Karen's gaze burning into his back, but he didn't look at her again. He had made his point. And for once, Karen had no words left to say. Karen stood stiffly in front of the HOA board, her hands clenched into tight fists at her sides. Gone was the smug, self-appointed neighborhood enforcer. Now she was just another resident, one being confronted with the consequences of her actions. James sat calmly across from her in the small HOA meeting room, his badge no longer tucked away but resting on the table in full view. The board members had read the reports. They had spoken to neighbors. And now, the weight of Karen's history was being laid out in front of everyone. One of the board members, an older man with salt and pepper hair, sighed as he shuffled through a stack of papers. Karen, he began, rubbing his temples, we've had multiple complaints about your behavior over the past few years, but this is different. He set the papers down and looked at her sternly. You called security on a homeowner, without cause. Karen lifted her chin, her lips pressed into a thin line. I thought he was trespassing, she said, her voice tight. James leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. No, you hoped I was trespassing, he corrected. You wanted an excuse, just like you did with the Rodriguez family, just like you did with the Jeffersons. This isn't about the rules, Karen. It's about control. A murmur ran through the small audience of neighbors who had gathered to witness the meeting. Some of them had been on the fence before, unsure whether Karen had really meant harm. But now, seeing her squirm under the weight of undeniable evidence, their doubt was fading. A woman in the back crossed her arms. Honestly, I always thought you were just strict about the rules, Karen, she said. But now, I'm seeing a pattern. Karen's nostrils flared. That's ridiculous, she snapped. I was only ever trying to protect this community. The board president shook his head. By harassing residents? He asked. By targeting families who've done nothing wrong? He glanced at James. And in this case, by making false allegations against an investigator? Karen froze. James sat back in his chair, watching her reaction. He didn't have to say anything else. The damage was done. The older board member exhaled slowly. Effective immediately, Karen, you're removed from any HOA-related duties. You're no longer allowed to file complaints without legitimate evidence. And if this behavior continues, he paused, choosing his next words carefully. We'll be forced to involve legal authorities. Karen's face turned a deep shade of red. You can't do that, but the murmurs of agreement from the neighbors said otherwise. For the first time, Karen wasn't the one in control, and for the first time, she had no one left to back her up. James stood, adjusting his jacket. Well, he said, glancing around the room, I think justice has been served. And with that, he walked out, leaving Karen to face the reality she had created. Karen sat alone on her porch, staring at the quiet street in front of her. The same street she had once patrolled like a self-appointed sheriff, watching, judging, controlling. Now it felt different, smaller, colder, the same. Neighbors who used to offer polite nods and forced smiles now avoided her gaze. Conversations hushed when she walked by. She had become what she feared most, irrelevant. The final decision from the HOA had come down swiftly. A formal reprimand, a hefty fine for filing multiple false complaints, a warning that any future incidents would result in legal action. She wasn't kicked out. HOAs weren't that powerful, but in a way, it almost felt worse. She had to stay here, surrounded by people who saw her for what she truly was. Inside his own home, James watched through the window as Karen sat motionless, lost in thought. He had faced people like her before, people who mistook authority for power, who used rules as a weapon rather than a shield. But this time had been different. This time, he had seen the fall in real time. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. It would have been easy to gloat, to revel in her downfall. But he didn't feel triumphant. If anything, he just felt tired. Power, he realized, was a strange thing. Some people sought it out of necessity, others clung to it out of fear. And then there were those, like Karen, who wielded it without understanding its weight, until it crushed them. A knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts. When he opened it, he found a small group of neighbors standing outside. An older woman smiled. "We just wanted to say, welcome to the neighborhood." James hesitated for a moment, then nodded, a small smile forming. "Thanks," he said. As they chatted, Karen remained on her porch, watching from a distance. For the first time in a long time, no one was paying attention to her. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real punishment. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the next part, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated. See you in the next one. Your support means the world.